Hello, I'm Mike Beck, professor and AXA chair in coastal resilience and director of the Center for Coastal Climate Resilience at the University of California, Santa Cruz. In this lesson, we'll explore the superpower of nature, especially reefs and wetlands, in helping coastal communities adapt to climate change. If you want to learn how natural coastal habitats protect us and how, in return, we can help protect them, then this class is for you. Climate change is no longer a problem of the future. It's here and now. The frequency and intensity of natural disasters, particularly from storms, has increased significantly in recent decades, putting our coasts at greater risk of erosion and flooding. All this leads to extensive damage and economic costs worldwide. Indeed, total damage from storms alone topped $210 billion worldwide in 2020. And with climate change, these costs will increase dramatically. This means urgent action is needed for us to adapt to these new climate realities. As the AXA chair in coastal resilience, I want to talk to you about the role that natural habitats such as reefs, mangroves, and marshes can play in helping us to build climate resilience. Who doesn't dream of living by the ocean? See, that's the problem. We love our coasts too much. We used to think of them as dangerous, but now we see them as idyllic. We want to build as close to the water as possible, but in doing so, we're destroying natural ecosystems like marshes, mangroves, and coral reefs. This destruction not only harms the environment, but also puts us at greater risk from coastal flooding, as it destroys our first line of coastal defense. Let's dive into some facts and figures. Coastal habitats, such as wetlands and reefs, are being lost rapidly. We've lost over 20% of the world's mangroves in just the last 4 decades. And the Earth has lost approximately half of its living coral cover since the 1870s. Indeed, more than half of the Great Barrier Reef was degraded by bleaching in 2020 alone. But it's not just coral reefs, it's also oyster reefs that used to line our coastlines, for example, across the US and Europe. But we've totally forgotten about the reefs that they used to create. And today, we've lost more than 85% of them. The loss of coastal habitats is driven by coastal development, overfishing, and pollution. And climate change is now adding to that destruction, as wetlands are challenged by rising seas and increasing waves, and reefs are challenged by increasing temperature and acidity. This is especially troubling because coastal habitats serve as that critical first line of defense, and their loss puts communities at even greater risk from coastal flooding. So what's the great power of coastal habitats? Well, corals and other reefs work as natural breakwaters, and they reduce flooding by breaking waves offshore. And as for wetlands, such as marshes and mangroves, well, they protect coastlines by dampening storm surge and waves, and they also prevent erosion and can even build new land. Unfortunately, funds dedicated to environmental conservation, including for habitat restoration, are very limited compared to the funding for hazard mitigation, climate adaptation, and storm recovery. We need to figure out how to show that nature can and should be part of the solution for protecting our communities so that we can invest in these nature-based solutions instead. This is my surf beach at home on January 5th, 2023. Normally, there's a lovely little beach, nice waves, and a small lagoon on the backside. But January 5th was the worst day of waves and storm damage that we've seen in decades, maybe ever, in Central California. Across town, waves smashed into roads, homes, and businesses, and that includes my beach. It includes areas like Capitola, where we lost the pier and many of the coastal businesses right at the shore, and Seacliff, where the campsites and the road leading to them were completely destroyed. But it's not just in California. 2020 was a record year for storms in the North Atlantic and Caribbean, with more named storms than ever before, 30. Indeed, we ran out of our typical alphabet names and had to resort to Greek letters, culminating ultimately in Hurricane Iota. There is some good news about storms. Deaths are decreasing, largely because we're much better at predicting and providing early warning. The bad news, however, is that the costs are rising. In 2020, reinsurers estimated that natural disasters worldwide produced losses greater than $210 billion, with insured losses greater than $80 billion. Scientists predict that climate change will make these storms even more intense, with a likely increase in the proportion of storms that reach categories 4 and 5 are most intense. Now, most people think that sea level rise is the main problem caused by climate change. But there's a much greater problem for our coastal infrastructure. Waves are rising too, and this is far more concerning for us right now. The daily attack of waves on our coastal infrastructure is devastating. Wave after wave, minute after minute, day after day, degrading the life of coastal infrastructure, including bridges, ports, and seawalls across hundreds of thousands of kilometers of coastline worldwide. We usually design this coastal infrastructure to last a half century or more, but that was for the wave climates of the past. Increasing wave energy means that those expensive infrastructures will now fail much, much earlier. Around the world, wetlands, such as coastal marshes in Europe, the US, and China, and mangrove forests across more than 100 tropical countries, provide coastal protection. For millennia, coastal fishers knew to push boats up in marshes and inside of mangroves to protect from storms. And in past decades, we seem to have forgotten those benefits, and we've seen these wetlands as swamps that needed to be drained and developed, and they've been decimated to build cities, ports, airports, and aquaculture farms. Yet wetlands, including marshes and mangroves, act as natural coastal defenses that protect people and property from flooding. Let me tell you how. Mangroves grow quickly in salt water at the edge of the coastal zone, where they form this front line of defense. Mangroves are also excellent at trapping sediments and building land. On average, mangroves can grow vertically by 1 to 10 millimeters per year in the land that they develop. Mangroves also reduce risks to more than 15 million people and prevent more than $65 billion in property damages every year. Mangroves do this by blocking storm surge and dampening waves and protecting people and structures at our shorelines. According to our estimates, the US, China, and Taiwan receive the greatest economic benefits from mangroves. Protection benefits to people are highest in key areas in the Indian Ocean and East Pacific, particularly in Vietnam, India, Bangladesh, and the Philippines. We generated maps summarizing the benefits that mangroves provide. They provide tens to hundreds of millions of dollars in flood protection benefits annually on coastlines around the world, and we can show the hotspots where these benefits are most critical and we should act first to protect them, including in areas in Southeast Asia as well as in the Caribbean. Even though we are still losing wetlands in many places, the good news is that it's slowed greatly, in part because we recognize the benefits, and we also know that wetlands can recover from this damage and even adapt to changing climates. Mangroves are resilient, and we know how to restore them. Hundreds of thousands of acres have been replanted across the tropics, mainly in Southeast Asia, in countries such as Vietnam and the Philippines. Indeed, mangrove and wetland restoration can be a highly cost-effective strategy for risk reduction. Have you ever stood on a tropical coastline and watched huge waves break offshore? This is the power of reefs protecting you. And this happens not just around tropical reefs, but around rocky reefs on temperate coastlines from South Africa to Spain, Australia to America. And inside of bays, oyster reefs used to provide some of these same services to us too. But let me focus on coral reefs. Coral reefs are one of our planet's most biodiverse ecosystems. They provide many important benefits to coastal communities, including tourism, fisheries, and recreation. But they also provide critical coastal protection that has been widely overlooked. Reefs act just like submerged breakwaters. They break waves and drain away their energy offshore before it floods coastal properties and communities. In fact, reefs can break 97% of the energy that would otherwise reach coastlines. On shorelines with coral reefs, if we were to lose just that topmost meter of reefs, these natural breakwaters, the cost of storms would double. In the US, coral reefs are a natural flood barrier worth millions of dollars every year. An example of these million-dollar reefs is in this image from Florida, and we've shown, highlighted here in blue, where those reefs are providing those really significant benefits. We also showed that around the world, if reefs were lost, the impacts would disproportionately affect some of our most socially vulnerable communities. Reefs are in trouble from development, overfishing, and climate change. But we can restore them. If we reduce the impacts to them, then they can even grow in the face of climate change. Almost every time I've ever talked to a coastal manager about restoring reefs for coastal defense, they always say, "But I heard that reefs are dying anyway." And this is not true on a variety of levels. First, reefs can adapt to climate change. Reefs, like wetlands, can even grow in the face of climate change. And they can self-repair if they're damaged. Of course, that's something that artificial infrastructure cannot do. And finally, reefs are still in better shape than most other coastal habitats such as wetlands or forests. And with a little love, we could help them out even more. Let me show you what I mean with this actual coral head that I collected in the Bahamas. It's dead, but when it was alive, it had polyps all over the surface, filled with colorful zooxanthellae. When corals become stressed, for example from warming and acidic water, these zooxanthellae flee and leave behind this white or bleached coral. This is a limestone skeleton, and it's why coral reefs and oyster reefs are actually like a natural limestone seawall. When we lose some of that seawall protection, then more wave energy passes over these reefs, leading to more flooding on shore. But we can also restore these reefs, building back these coral heads, increasing the height of the reef, and blocking the waves from hitting those shorelines. Reefs can also grow with climate change, and they can even keep up with sea level rise if we keep them healthy. This is the healing power of reefs. As we covered earlier, the costs of coastal disasters are rising quickly, and we're spending hundreds of billions of dollars every year to recover from them. This is not an efficient or even sensible way to manage risk or government budgets, and it's certainly not as best for the communities that we need to help. First, we need to spend before disasters when it's way more cost effective. Of course, we absolutely must help communities to recover from disasters, but it would be better to help them avoid these impacts in the first place. The reality is that we spend most funds to manage natural disasters after they happen, and not before. A typical hazard mitigation grant program may have a total budget of a few hundreds of millions of dollars per year, whereas after a single event or storm season, we can spend tens to hundreds of billions of dollars to recover. Spending ahead of time is also much more cost-effective. FEMA estimates that funding spent ahead of time to reduce hazards provides a 6-to-1 return on investment. That's good money. Second, we need to stop reinvesting in just the gray solutions like bulkheads and seawalls. They've failed, and we must be able to rely more on greener, nature-based solutions to protect our coastlines. We've built our coastal cities in some of the lowest lying, wettest, highest risk areas, and then destroyed our first line of natural defenses, wetlands, to do it. And then we act surprised at the damage from coastal storms. We need to stop building and rebuilding in the high-risk flood areas and start rebuilding our natural defenses. It's a simple fact. We don't protect what we don't value. While we value what we take from nature, fish, water, gas, we don't place a value on the natural assets that we leave intact to provide critical benefits such as flood protection. But that's starting to change. The UN and the World Bank and others are leading the way with natural capital accounting. And we're helping assess the value provided by mangroves and reefs and storm protection to every nation every year using the exact same techniques that are used to account for what we take from nature. When we do that, we show, in fact, that we gain enormous economic benefits for our people and property by keeping our habitats. Countries such as China, Vietnam, Australia, the US, and India receive tens to hundreds of billions of dollars from just mangroves and just flood protection benefits, and that's before we even think about the many other ecosystem services that these habitats provide. This understanding is helping to change policies about how we manage nature. And we must expand this thinking in private markets as well. And carbon markets provide a good example for that. We have recognized that we must slow climate change. And governments and businesses are required, and in many instances are voluntarily purchasing carbon credits to take action, such as planting trees to soak up this carbon. And this in turn protects future people and property, say in 2050, from climate change. But what about protecting people now? It's already clear that climate change is here, and much of this change is impacting people, and it's usually those people that have contributed the least to climate change, such as in small island developing states across the Caribbean, Pacific, and Indian Oceans. We should be getting public and private support for actions that reduce impacts such as flooding from climate change. So in addition to supporting mitigation markets, we should also be developing and investing in adaptation markets, whereby we buy credits, take actions such as planting mangroves and rebuilding reefs to reduce the impacts of climate change right now, not just in the future. We have insurance to recover and rebuild the things we care about. But what happens when natural habitats get damaged? All right, let's take a look at two ways that insurance could help us recover, restore, and even preserve habitats. First, we could insure nature as an asset, just like our homes. And second, we could value and ensure the benefits that habitats provide. In 2018, the first insurance policy to cover risks to an ecosystem was developed by the Nature Conservancy and Swiss Re, and I had the pleasure to be a part of that team. The policy covered storm damages to the reefs just south of Cancun. And the policy stated that if storms with winds of 100 knots or greater hit this area of the Mesoamerican reef, then there would be a payout within 10 days that could be used to help recover the reefs. That policy was triggered by Hurricane Delta in 2020, and there was a payout to help recover the reef. You see, what happens after a storm is that the coral heads are torn off of the reef and thrown into the lagoon, where they roll around still alive for 2 or maybe 3 weeks. So if you can get in there, particularly with trained local divers, then you can get these corals and glue them back onto the reef to quickly reestablish and help that reef recover. At the same time, you can also remove debris that is further damaging the reefs. And this can be everything from fishing nets to refrigerators that are lost in the storm and floods. That reef policy is now being expanded to cover more reefs throughout Central America, and this year in Hawaii. And soon, hopefully, there may be innovative insurance to cover mangroves damaged by storms. Now, let's take a look at the second way that insurance could help, which unfortunately has not yet been used, but it could be. We worked with the U.S. Geological Survey, USGS, to show the loss of productions resulting from the reef damage caused by 2017 hurricanes. What you can see here in this figure is the risk that we would expect in a 1 in 100 year storm in Puerto Rico before the reefs were damaged. And that's these white bars. The blue areas are the damages that occurred during those hurricanes. After the hurricanes, we reassess that risk given the loss of reefs and how much additional losses there could be in the future. And that's all the yellow, orange, and red bars. So we can point specifically to where damages from reefs, here in the blue, will demonstrably increase risks to people and property. Further, we can specifically show where reef restoration would have the most significant benefits for reducing risk, and that's shown here also off of San Juan, Puerto Rico. In this figure, the height of the bars indicates the total risk in the 100-year floodplain. And then if we were to restore reefs, and so we restored them right along these yellow bars off the coast, we can show how much risk would be reduced. And that's the blue bars, specifically showing where reef restoration would have the greatest benefits. So what's the point? We can show quantitatively that damages to reefs increase risk, and that restoring them reduces that risk in very specific ways. And this is where we ought to be investing funds from payouts from both public and private sources. Indeed, we should be giving policyholders incentives to ensure that these habitats remain intact. And homeowners are likely to respond to such signals. A survey of coastal landowners in Alabama showed that small insurance incentives could change whether they chose to restore marshes or to continue to rebuild failing bulkheads after storms. They will build it, that is, restore habitats, if we signal their value. Long ago, I did my thesis research at a place called St. Joe Bay, which was very close to the town of Mexico Beach in the panhandle of Florida. This is where we went to dive bars after work, and our work was in fact diving. A few years back, in 2018, this town was absolutely leveled by Hurricane Michael. It was a Category 5 storm that came ashore right in the panhandle, and you can see that here. And I mean, the houses were leveled after the storm. They look like just a bunch of matchsticks that have been thrown together with boats nesting on top of them. Immediately after, we also looked at what happened to all the coastal marshes that were at ground zero around the town. And only 2% of those marshes were damaged. That is, coastal wetlands are resistant to storm damage. And not only were they less damaged, but they also bounced back within 6 months after that storm. And that's a testament to the resilience of nature. We need to work more with this natural resilience to help protect ourselves, instead of spending most of our budgets on more gray infrastructure solutions. And as a reminder, and as we discussed, if you look at just the tens of billions of dollars spent after storms, only about 1 to 3% of this goes to build natural resilience. But there are many programs around the world starting to work more with our nature-based solutions. We've not yet reached the tipping point where nature-based solutions are regularly considered, but we're getting closer. And the work that I've shown you before that quantifies these coastal protection benefits is helping. And you can help too. Whenever your town or even country is considering coastal protection measures, you should ask, have you considered natural coastal protections? Are they a part of your cost-benefit analyses? This is in fact what the residents in Miami did. The U.S. Army Corps was proposing a very large and ugly seawall that would completely block downtown Miami from the sea. And the communities and cities rebelled and wanted to know why mangroves and other nature-based solutions were not a part of this picture. And now, a much more aesthetically pleasing plan is being developed which incorporates hybrid solutions, putting gray and green together. Other significant opportunities exist to greatly expand support for natural infrastructure using some of the same financial mechanisms that have traditionally supported gray infrastructure projects like roads and levees. Right now, after storms, if built infrastructure is damaged, then we invest immediately to recover it. Not so for our natural seawalls like reefs and mangroves. That should change. And given our findings about how valuable wetlands and reefs are for coastal protection, we believe that they should be viewed as national infrastructure and made eligible for funding from hazard mitigation and disaster recovery budgets, just like other coastal defense structures. Natural ecosystems have the power to reduce risks, and they can help deliver a triple win with benefits for the economy, communities, and the environment. All that's left to do is for us to act.